We are ready to start. You are in Be Nimble, Be Quick, robust, continuous learning plans. And we're really happy to be with you. And it looks like we're a pretty small group. So please interrupt us with your questions and we'll monitor the chat and we'll get going. And I'll start by passing on the slides. So hold on as soon as we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll hope that you'll introduce yourselves in a second. We'll talk about what's going on, why Dawn and I kind of came together and said we needed to create something for school leaders and for authorizers to use when thinking about this time when schools are remote and in person and sometimes doing both at the same time. And then, so we'll start by introducing, I'm Naomi Rubin DeVoe. I am currently the Vice President for Authorizing and Accountability at the National Charter Schools Institute. But before that, I was a Deputy Director at the DC Public Charter School Board for about 7.5 years, and that's the time I got to work with Dawn. And before that, I was at Focus, which was the local association of charter schools in Washington, D.C. I was a teacher to begin with, and this has really been a year of focusing on how to measure schools, how to think about accountability, and how to make sure students are learning during a time when everything is unexpected and changing always. So Don, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. I'm Don Swifer. I am coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada, where I serve on the State Public Charter School Authority. Prior to that, I was on the DC Public Charter School Board for 11 years. I've been involved with charter schools in different areas. I have been and am on the board of charter schools in numerous states. And I think maybe for this conversation, some of the background that I'm kind of drawing on that I hope is most useful and interesting to you is that I've done a lot with personalized learning pedagogies and practices over the years, and right now I'm in the middle in this moment that we're in the post-pandemic and post-pandemic world of running micro schools. My nonprofit Nevada Action for School Options is running micro schools by contract for the city of North Las Vegas, which is the poorest working jurisdiction in Clark County, in their rec centers and libraries. And as part of that work, we have our model where we have our own curriculum and our own program up and running for teaching and learning. But we also have half of the side that works with kids in different charter schools and different district schools doing their distance learning. So through that experience with 140 odd kids, I've really gotten to watch how learning at a distance in a hybrid setting is working, and been able to hopefully come up with some takeaways that are helpful to you in the work that you do in the schools that you lead.
All right. So now we would love to have a moment to learn who's with us. I don't know if you can unmute yourselves and talk. That would be best since we are a small group. If you can, it would be great to hear from you. If you can't, then putting it in chat would help us know where to go. And as you introduce yourself, saying sort of something you would like to learn today, why you're here would be great. So I'm going to take the silence as no one wants to talk or you can't, but I would love to hear a little bit in the chat. If you have a second to just type in, who you are, who you represent today, and what brought you here.
And if not, Naomi and I can take turns sort of impersonating you. Dr. Beck, I see you there. I'd love to hear from you. And if not, maybe he can start with you.
Okay, well, we're going to move on. But at any time, please, we know the chat works, so it would be great to hear from you through the chat. So the reason that we're here, there's no unmute option. Thank you, Sarah. We're glad to have you, Sarah, and thank you for joining our chat, and we would welcome anyone else to join as well. It'll be much better for all of us if we're communicating and sharing ideas, because we certainly don't know very much between the two of us, Dawn and I. We just, we're here to learn as well. But to start with, if you haven't yet, thank you, Dr. Boyd. It's wonderful. And thank you for supporting your teachers. They really need your help right now. And your principals. It's a tough time. So we have, quoting from Missing the Margins. This is from Bellwether. It's a report that just came out in the last couple of weeks. And they did a study that estimates roughly over 3 million students are currently disengaged from school. And by disengaged, they mean they're not attending the full day, or they're only, or they're not even attending at all. And all of these students, if we imagine that general population, 1 in 4 students is a student with disability or an English language learner or has other complicating factors, you can just imagine what this is doing to our society. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a teacher in Oregon over the weekend, and she just did parent-teacher conferences. They're remote, and she found out that a student who'd been always coming 2 hours late to a 4-hour class, she's like, can you get your kid to kind of sign in on time? It's the 2nd grade. And the mom eventually said, look, I get up at 3:30 in the morning to drive my son over to my sister's house where he sleeps, where I put him back to bed at 4:30, and then she has a really hard time waking him up at 7. And I think that is something we have to think about. So, what happens even if he were to wake up at 7? How is he engaging in school, and what is the school doing to accommodate the fact that the schedules are just all up? Families are doing the best they can. On top of the fact that we're losing students, and whether they're in school attending and not really engaging, or whether they're not even able to attend, we don't have any best practices. Normally, go to that best practice library, go find call a friend, all of that. But all of this is now, we're on brand new territory. And it's important to remember that, we are leaders, we're pioneers, and we are able to do what we do best as charters, which is to think through and solve and innovate and become quick and nimble to create the right environment for our students, which is why we named this Quick and Nimble. Dawn, do you have anything to add to this complicating factor piece?
Yeah, I think the most important lesson that I've learned and watched and observed is iteration, right? So none of us have been in this before. We all had some thoughtful sessions with our teams about how to do this best, but no 2 days are the same, no 2 sets of circumstances are the same. And I think the best success that I'm seeing is from schools that really have a commitment to continuous improvement, to really focus on supporting their educators. And if something's working, if they want to try something else, first of all, don't be afraid to try something else. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, the goodwill that we're seeing in your communities and from your students and from your parents really seems to go well, as we're all in this to react to the circumstances that are constantly changing. As Naomi and I were sort of preparing our presentation to make it as current as we can, we realized when we originally wrote this paper, the idea of a second wave, right, seemed like something adequately in the distance that we could talk about it as a hypothetical. And now we're obviously to a point of talking about subsequent waves, and what any of this is going to look like 3 weeks from now is something that's probably unpredictable to us. So that commitment to constantly iterate, to constantly get better, and to just continue to find ways to best meet the evolving needs of our community is the commitment that most of us make within our schooling environment on a day-to-day anyway, and something that authorizers should be understanding and should be recognizing that the rigidity is not necessarily a helpful thing. And what have we done today to make things better for our students today? And if not, why not?
So I think, we really, you jumped us into the next topic of the advantage. We're small, you're independently run, you're creative, you're resourceful, you're community centered. All of these things make the charter movement, and you, as the leader of a charter school or as an authorizer, um, the person that can really make the biggest impact on students right now. We're seeing districts stymied. They're so large, it's hard to make decisions that can impact, that where they can get all their teachers to sign on to and their families to sign on to and respond to all the needs. And you're in a place where you can do that. And so one of the things that Don and I really wanted to make sure is that you do it, and that you're not, that you lead, that you take that approach, and that we wanted to give you some tools to say, hey, here are some things to look for as you're leading and trying new things, and don't be afraid, because this is uncharted waters. So we have something that we created called Tools for Setting Up Success. It's 7 pieces. And each piece has a different way of looking at students, right, or at your school. And this is either for charter authorizers or for the school leader or for a board member, for that matter, to be able to say, hey, here are the different approaches, here are the different things to make sure you're doing what needs to happen so that students are being successful in your school. And if you go back in the chat to the beginning, I sent a link to the larger document. The first link is to the page on our website where you can download this material, and the second link is to the document that we're going to be going through together as a group this morning or this afternoon. So starting with curriculum instruction evaluation, this is always where we, kind of as school leaders, this is where we always begin. What is the school? What makes the school? What's the great part of the school? And then how are you ensuring that part of the school is happening when you're remote? I tend to not use the word virtual because I know that you're not always on a computer. A lot of learning is occurring, outside of an electronic setting, and students are learning, but they're not in the school building, so it's remote. So one of the things that has become most challenging is how do you make your school, through your mission, what makes you uniquely charter, why the families chose you, how do you do that when you're not in your school building, or you're not consistently in your school building because of the changes in the climate or in the student population, like some being hybrid and some being full-time and some being remote. I know it's hard. We were really hoping to be able to have a discussion. If you can add in anything that you're doing, that you're seeing, your mission is showing out this way. So, as an example, there are some schools that will say today they're following their mission by having Spirit Day, or students are wearing their school logos. The Montessori schools, there's a school I'm on the board of that is a language immersion school where they sent home supplies of all of the manipulatives that they were going to use to the family so they could follow along and do those manipulatives at home that they normally would have had in the school building. So if you are doing anything that you can share with your colleagues around making your mission in your home environment or the virtual remote environment, it'd be great to see that in the chat. And as you think of that, maybe Dawn, do you have examples of how your students are you seeing the mission in reality?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things that we've seen that we can maybe talk about here. On the original report that this is based on, there was a reference to how are your teachers working in teams, and I think that's sort of indicative of some of the real interesting stuff that we're seeing. We've got some charter schools that have multiple classrooms at the same grade level, and you've got your third grade team. And probably like you, we've got different arrangements, right? So our charter schools use very different approaches to how they're going to do hybrid. We have some charter schools that just simply like have a teacher talk to students in the class and talk at a camera at the same time, right? That's sort of at one end of the potential of what hybrid learning can do. On the other hand, we've got teams that really were thoughtful about it. They said, this educator is maybe naturally the best communicator in a digital distance platform. So she's going to be the lead, and she's going to be doing the direct instruction portion of the distance learning program for all of the third grade kids, and the other educators are going to deploy as a team in different ways, whether it's providing one-on-one or direct feedback or different aspects. So trying different ways and connecting in different ways, and also making sure that the feedback that students receive for submitted work is real. That if in this environment that's new to all of us with everything that's going on, students are submitting their coursework, that we figure out ways to get them meaningful feedback that feels rich in this environment that's so stilted and so different than any of us are used to doing. And I think some of those examples, and I'd love to hear what some of you are experiencing or doing. And I think that sort of being creative outside the box and really being thoughtful about how we're handling our instruction, and also we'll talk a little bit about assessment and maintaining integrity in that environment. And I think this is a time where we're really all learning from each other and learning from our mistakes and learning from our strengths and continuing to get better at this.
So to move into assessment integrity, this is something that it's really important to start thinking about. What does it mean to be at home or remotely or in a micro school, learning the curriculum at your school, and when you provide assessments? And so one of the most important pieces is to realize that some students will have a lot at their fingertips. They'll have a parent at their fingertips, an older sibling. They know how to use the internet. They're going to be able to kind of quickly and game any assessment that you give that you think is going to be just a one-on-one assessment. And then there are other students that may not have any of that at their fingertips. They're going to be struggling to even log on. I use my daughter often in this situation. She is a second year at UVA. And last spring when she came home, when they sent everyone home, the professors were looking at students having to take their final exams and knowing that they were all talking to one another. And so what they ended up doing was not like invest in heavy duty technology that follows the eye motion and says you can't look away from the screen to ensure no cheating. Instead, they made really hard tests and sort of said it's open book, open note, open friend. And so watching and listening to her take the assessments and arguing with her friends about the answers that are supposed to be, and really diving in, and then talking to her afterwards about questions she would have skipped if she was by herself in a lecture hall taking that test by herself, and now she was forced to sort of talk it through with her friends. And I thought, this is really, really about what you want in corporate, in our society, in a job. You want to have people that collaborate and work together, and that the assessment at the end of the day was actually even more than just the content knowledge. It was that they could work together. So I'm sort of encouraging schools to think about it in that way. Don't have to use, a lockdown piece. You can allow for this sort of collaboration, especially if your vision and mission is to create, 21st century students, which often is out there, or good citizens, because this is what that happens. And we've got a comment from Darren. And I think it's worth looking at that authorizers have such a strong role, and that we really initially created this for authorizers to say, let the schools alone. This is not time to be too tight on things. You need to be nimble and quick too, because the schools are trying to be. So I'm sort of sad that your authorizer forced you to drop blended learning from your charter. But then you got back to it, I see, but then you was forced back into it. I think that blended learning has a lot of flexibility that we haven't paid attention to. I agree, Darren. Dawn, do you have anything to add? I know you've always been a strong proponent of blended learning, period. So,
yeah, it was interesting. I was just with a group last week that was sort of some of the first blended learning cohorts with Kip and Power in South Los Angeles. And when the debate was, do we call it hybrid learning? Do we call it blended learning? And for 3 years, I led, I guess it was the nation's first national fellowship for school district superintendents who were transitioning their whole district to personalized learning models. And in the course of doing that, right, there's no one right answer, and anything that we think is a best practice now is probably going to be left in the dust any amount of time from now, and we're going to constantly be iterating. But I think the observation that we sort of generally had between we did 3 cohorts of 10 school district superintendents around the country, is that the more creative that they were in terms of thinking through the pedagogy of personalizing teaching and learning in ways that we're not just replicating the classroom, the whole group direct instruction classroom experience using technology. And we have some charter school networks here in Nevada that are effectively doing that. They're approaching it as they see themselves, sort of teaching to their strengths, right? So we have a classroom in front of the teacher, in front of a teacher in front of the classroom, the old sort of sage on the stage approach, and just trying to just use technology platforms to deliver the same old way of doing things, where you can really be creative and thoughtful, Darren, as you know well, in blended learning in all sorts of different ways. You can have your educators collaborate across disciplines, across grades in interesting ways. You can find ways to leverage the delivery of content so that you can really engage in higher order thinking skills and critical thinking and activities much more effectively than you can if you're willing to support your classroom teachers and really let them be creative about it. And I think some of what we've seen are things that we're not going to go back from after the pandemic or the post-pandemic circumstances end. So really encouraging your teams to pause, stand down, take advantage of the opportunity to think this thing through, and really make sure that we're delivering the best possible education product on a basis moving forward that lets us continue to evolve and continue to change. And hopefully we've all got authorizers that recognize the value in that don't require rigid formal changes to charter plans, and that, Darren, what you had experienced in Utah was, prior to that, was certainly something I would hope was the exception and not the rule. And I think we're in a position now where I'm excited when I talk to operators and watch operators and what they're doing. And I see some dazzling work happening in distance learning, like in one of the 5th grade poetry, teachers doing poetry, and some amazing things that weren't really that possible in a non-technology based infused environment in a classroom. And I think some of those are going to be lessons and pedagogies that we're going to probably stick with and not abandon.
So we're going to move into our second element of 7, which was student behavior, social emotional support. So curriculum instruction, first one. Now we get into really engagement. And Dawn sort of talked about this a little bit earlier. This is kind of the most important, the glue. This makes everything work, or the wheels, because you need to figure out, are students engaged, really engaged, not just signing on and turning off their camera and saying here when the instructor says here, but how can you really be measuring for engagement? And what are you doing if you find out they're not engaged? And what's your triage? It's almost an opportunity to say, okay, what do you do when you find out a student isn't engaged? And how do you then figure out how to get them back engaged? And this is really where eventually we'll talk about professional development, which is also really important. How are you helping your teachers understand what is going on with their students when they're disengaged? We basically think there's like three or four reasons. One is they're academically unable to access the material, so they can disengage because now it's gone over their head. And you can't see it in the classroom. We would see the head go down the desk, or the book get thrown on the floor, or some sort of behavior that allows you as a teacher to know students disengaging and it's too hard. But without those visual cues, we're having to figure out, well, what does disengagement because of curriculum instruction look like? And then that takes one path, right? Then there's disengagement because their IV's not working. So their computer's on the fritz, their internet's not working, so they're disengaged because they can't, because they're not able to. That's a whole other set of solutions that you need to address to that problem. And then it could be that the student is experiencing trauma, that there is something going on that is making it really hard to engage. I think similar to what my friend witnessed with her student who was unable to engage for the first 2 hours of class. That was something that's going on now in the home life you as a teacher then and as a school have to figure out, well, what are you going to do to accommodate so that student doesn't fall further behind as they miss 2 hours a day of a very short day of school. So those are three examples of why. And then a fourth is just the student is struggling with the technology, can't figure out where to go. You've got too many things happening on the page, and you expect them to find something that they can't access. So we expect like a non-responsive student plan that can dig out why, I think, is really helpful. And if you don't have one, it's something to develop with your teachers and your parents, because the community will share more with you about what the issues are. And then you can have this sort of roadmap to help, especially a substitute teacher or a teacher that's working through a troubled situation, to figure out, who do I need? Is it a counselor? Is it an IT? Is it, I need tutoring for the student, I need to go in extra and provide extra time for the student? Or do I need to be available do I need teaching staff available in the evenings who aren't teaching during the day but can be there when students are more likely to be home and awake and able to learn? So lots of solutions. I always say at this point, your school is no longer limited to 8 a.m. 3 p.m. right? You've got 24 hours, and your teachers may really appreciate being able to teach at night when they're not also watching their own kids. So you can play around with when you're offering classes, and how you think about what works. John, do you want to take on social emotional well-being or anything else?
Yeah. Well, there's lots to that and to this. So, I mean, let me just ask you, as a thoughtful group of educators and leaders we have, is it, when your classrooms are in a distance learning mode, and kids are home with their cameras and microphones on, is it okay if a kid just puts their head down on the desk and goes to sleep? I mean, that's the sort of thing that some of the most successful uh, personalized blended learning charter schools have accepted, that it is probably okay for a kid to just put their head down on the desk for a little while. Whereas it's not okay in a distance learning format for a kid to act out and have a full on temper tantrum and distract from other kids while they're doing it. Something else is that when we watch schools use the technology, or really push the technology, right? So we've got one school that likes to use breakout rooms, and the thought is that the teacher can lead a small group instruction in a small group way, while the other kids are doing breakout rooms. But it sounds great, and some of the time it works, but kids get, especially younger kids, when they're not sure where to go, when they're not sure where to go for their breakout room, they're going to get confused. What are we doing to make sure that they can get their questions answered and learn where they need to be without interrupting the experience for all of the other kids in the program, the way a kid learning out in class would? And what are the best ways to do that? So again, I come back to iteration and trying different things, and maybe deploying our teams as best we can and as thoughtfully as we can to do that, so that kids really do feel like they're part of something in real time, where how they're doing matters, and the feedback that they get from that. Darren's point's a good one. Really, really matters, but they were constantly reminding kids that we're not just here because we have to be, but because we care about them, and we want them to remember this as a positive experience, and that we can be there for them in ways that we can show up and be for them in ways that matter to them right now.
And I think this is a big issue. I'm part of the Equity Coalition that is around students with disabilities, and this is a big issue. Not everyone likes being on camera, right? And so you have to figure out, if someone's disengaging because they're not on the camera, does that mean that they're actually not paying attention, or is it because they don't want to see, or be seen by their classmates? Cyberbullying and other things. It's hard to have your face there. Always in front of all your peers. Kind the working for equitable access, of course, this is sort of your basic. This almost should have been number one. You can't run a school that's dependent on a electronic setting if your families don't have access to technology. And so, if you haven't really figured out what's going on, then you can't come up with solutions. The most innovative solution by far that I've heard was a school that was kind of turning school into, I like to call it the yoga class school. So it's a yoga studio kind of thing, and you can take your class whenever you want. So they offer, you have to take 5, this is for an upper, middle school or high school. You have to take 5 English classes, let's say, over the week, but you get to pick your instructor and you pick your time, and they offer the classes from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So a student can choose their instructor and choose their time as long as they go through. It takes a lot of coordination, obviously, and enough students to be able to manage that. But what we have learned is that students watching the video of the recorded class isn't the same. No surprise there, right? But that's not enough to say, oh, they can just they can just watch this at night. So the student, that was 2 hours late every day, just having it taped isn't going to help that student catch up. And he happens to be an English learner. So instead, now it's going to be about, well, is there someone whose day starts later that can actually catch the student up when he is able to log in and be present? And are there a number of those students, and they all can be logging in for a separate class so that it can accommodate a working family schedule that's clearly trying to get their kids through the school day, but unable to do it during the school traditional hours. So asynchronous learning is great if it's really with an adult. That's always the caveat. It's not enough just to have it videotaped. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, let me give 2 examples of a couple kids that I think are informative here, right? So as leaders, we do have a tendency to want to standardize, and we want to have rules for everybody so that everyone understands what the expectations are, and there's a lot of validity to that. Let me give 2 examples, though, where that might not have worked out the way that it was hoped to. One is that I'm working with a nonprofit shelter here in Las Vegas who serves families impacted by domestic violence. And it's a terrific arrangement where they don't provide their own curriculum, but for kids that are in distance learning programs at charter schools and in the district, the kids are in a room, and the shelter provides the technology and the space to do the work. Problem is, for those kids, every other kid is at home. And when you're at home, you don't have to wear a mask. And when these kids are online, they have to wear a mask because they're in a big room, right? It's a health emergency. So we found that just allowing those kids the flexibility to not have their camera on when other kids do removed a stigma that these kids felt was very real. And along with some other thoughtful strategies, we've been able to really improve the quality of the engagement of the kids in the program. And I think that makes that really makes a difference for those kids in those settings. Another one is when we have low-income populations with multiple siblings and basically a studio apartment, and the kids are doing their conscientious best to do what they're supposed to do and be on school, but it's just too loud in their room with multiple siblings and sometimes a parent all talking at the same time, and we let those kids turn off their camera and turn off their microphone as need be, and by dealing with them and encouraging them to be, helping them be responsible, helping them to participate in the way that's best for them, sort of defies the rules and in ways that I think really makes a difference for those kids. So those sort of flexibilities really, really matter when it comes to equitable access, I think.
Darren, we love your chat. Anyone else want to join in with comments? It's great to be able to have to listen and feel engaged and communicating with you, because it's hard presenting I feel for the teachers that are presenting to empty classrooms often. So we've talked a bit about special populations already. Of course, it's no surprise this becomes the group of students that everyone is, most worried about. Students who are not already, if you have a student with a disability or an English learner, providing the right supports to that student and able to keep them engaged, is really hard, especially English learners where their home language is then heard all day long. And they may not be able to acquire English at the rate that they would have had they been immersed in a school where they were speaking English. Thinking through how you're offering supports. One of the questions that came up in a different setting was, about how do you offer the supports when you've got in person, if you are trying to do a hybrid, and these are students that you would bring back first and foremost. How are you offering in-person support when you only have one EL teacher and then keeping that teacher safe, who might be seeing all these different people? And the response that we heard from the experts there was saying, do train the trainer models. It may not meet the criteria for considered hours and all of that, but it will get the services to the students. So if the EL director or the special ed coordinator is actually helping the gen ed teachers do the practices that they would be doing, the services will get to the student. Again, it may not count, but that's not really what's important here. The important is that the students are getting what they need to be successful. Dawn, do you have anything you want to add with special populations?
So Naomi talked about the asymmetric aspects of this, right? And I'm a real believer in the ways that we can thoughtfully incorporate, whatever your favorite are. We're working with Dreambox, we're working with Lexia. I've really come to love Zern for math, and we have other schools that are working a lot with iReady. The problem though is, for instance, with English language learners, for one glaring example, those platforms don't those philanthropy endowed high quality digital learning environments don't necessarily exist for all English language learners, and when they do, we don't all have them, right? Those are some expensive programs. Zern, of course, is free, which is one of the reasons that I love it so much. So, I mean, the world of digital content, the world of the venture capital community that's been investing in that digital content, there's some terrific stuff there that can be used for English language learners. Absolutely, and I'm sure we probably all have our favorites. But at the end of the day, that's a woefully underinvested area that we're now realizing is absolutely crucial for the tools that it can provide. So I'd love to know any of your thoughts. If you've had particular luck, say in math, with particular asymmetric platforms that are good with English language learners, we're all sort of desperate for enough of them and for more of them. If you have things that you like, I would love to hear about it, because I have a pretty urgent need for that here. Or read about them, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. It's and this is a time of sharing. This is where it's really, creating communities to learn together is going to be so important, because there are no best practices, as we said before. So I also really appreciate what Darren had said earlier. You've got to try and just be flexible and try things out, and just see what happens, because that's the only way we're going to learn what's going to work. Because this isn't, especially, these are two populations that haven't done extremely well in traditional online learning settings. And so we're really having to think through quickly, well, how do we do this well and better for students? So it's a good time to reach out to your old friends who are in other schools and find out what's going on in their classrooms and in their buildings, to learn what's working, what's not working, and to try something for 2 weeks and then abandon if it doesn't seem like it's catching on. Staff professional development is just a super important piece of our work. And right now, what we have noticed a lot is, I'm going to just jump into the student safety portion of it. How are your staff being trained to understand and know that students are safe? One of the things that's out there is a statistic of many, many fewer students being, referred for family services, for child protective services, child and family services, and usually the first reporter is a teacher or a counselor in the school or a nurse in the school. And when they don't have those contacts, who's watching out for the student? And so, what is it that you're providing for your teachers and your staff to make sure that they're paying attention to the student's well-being? From just food security, housing, security. It's a hard time, and there's a lot of people out of work and students feeling the pressure of their parents' stress, and so that there's a lot of training on how do you handle that as a teacher, and know when and how do you recognize, so something to just think about as you're planning through. Dawn, did you want to talk about redesigning or?
Yeah, and nothing really new. Let me just circle back to the question of, so in the spring when we realized we were going to probably shut down for the balance of the school year, the question of, well, I mean, maybe the best thing that we can do, anticipating what's going to happen in the fall, is to pause here and really work with our teachers in some innovative ways to really think through pedagogy and really think through the methodology and the approaches that we're going to use. And some schools were pretty thoughtful about that. You're starting to see that pay off, and some were less so. So getting back to that culture of continuous improvement and what are the best ways that we can get this done. Let's look at the feedback and the experience. If schools are able to share, the way that you would do a classroom observation, and let an administrator or a team teacher go into a classroom and really sort of see how it's going, see what we're doing with the kids who are not engaged, see what are the takeaways that we can continue to improve, and really be thoughtful about that, and work that into our own staff meetings and workshops, and really share from each other's experiences to really support our teachers now when we really need to most, to help them iterate and help them think through things and learn from each other's mistakes. Sarah, your point is a great one, which is, look, sometimes it really does work great in our heads, and then we go out and do it. We're hitting the world of unforeseen problems. We have a charter school that required their teachers to go and do all of their distance learning from on-site in the building, which sounded good to the principal at the time because of the ways it could have the team interact and learn from each other as a staff. The problem is when there were internet outages and suddenly required your faculty to be in a building, and then that building's internet wasn't taken for granted. That's absolutely maybe an extreme example of something that sounded good on paper that didn't quite translate into that way. So how are we, being thoughtful, back to Naomi's original point of, we're charter schools. This is what we do best. How are we taking advantage of what we do best to deliver a meaningful product that's evolving to evolving needs?
All right. We have about 15 minutes left, so we are on family engagement. We have two more topics. Family engagement is, again, the biggest way to keep getting a check on whether what you are thinking is working, right? So I love Sarah's comment earlier about how in theory things look great and then it's not in practice. And one of the best ways to know it's not is to be polling your family. So I know of quite a few schools. There's a school whose board I'm on is doing surveys all the time. How's it going? My son's school is not doing that. I wish they were. But I think getting that feedback from families really helps you understand as a school, here's what's working, here's what's not working, here's what's working for this population of students, here's what's not, because, of course, it's different for every family. And then it's important that you're over communicating and not relying only on technology to communicate. We used to pin notes on kids, to bring home to their parents, and that isn't going to work when they don't show up at school. So how do you make sure that the student, parents don't always read their texts or don't always go to their email. So are you sending things out? Are you actually physically I know of quite a few schools that are visiting, just visiting the homes of the students so that they can deliver information and communicate directly face to face with the families and do a check in on how they're doing, and how their students are doing. It's a lot of work. But you do have staff that, got some schools that have repurposed their aftercare staff to being the family liaison, or their aftercare staff into creating, as Dawn does, micro schools within the school. They're not teachers; they're their aftercare staff. That is, but taking a small group of students in cohorts in the school building, where in safe numbers, to be able to deliver the instruction through the internet, but get that support, so that when the family's saying, I can't do this because I'm working full time outside of the home, or I have too much going on to provide a quiet space, the schools are responding by creating that quiet space with a non-teacher educator as the lead. Scott,
Yeah, just one quick ad. Our teachers are working really, really hard right now, and when it comes to office hours, we want to relax. We want to let them help their own families and prepare and not really impede on their time. Something though that we're seeing is if there are not designated office hours, we're having kids sometimes, little guys who are confused about where to go and how to do things. We're having parents, the more assertive parents, jumping on in the middle of a lesson and interrupting it, and sometimes they're steam popping out of their ears and they're hopping mad, and sometimes it's more thoughtful than that. But we don't create a very clear pathway for that interaction and for parents or students to have office hours to do it. It's going to bleed into the day-to-day session, and it's going to stand in the way of learning.
all right. All right, and 7 is resiliency for managing through crisis. So we've talked a lot about how hard teachers are working right now, how hard you're working right now. It is, probably the most difficult time in education that we've experienced, and at least in my lifetime. I think the teaching and then the hospitals are really, it's a whole new world. So, one thing is to ask you, what are you doing about teacher shortages? Is people have ideas right now? You must have already experienced something. How do you manage for keeping continuity for kids when a teacher is sick, or a teacher gives up and says, this isn't for me? And how do you get new teachers into the profession at a time when you really are in this very bizarre way of communicating? Love to see some comments on that if you have any. And then Don, while they're commenting, do you have thoughts on subsequent waves, as we are certainly experiencing right now in many places?
Yeah. And Lisa, thanks so much for your respond on Discord. That's interesting. I look forward to learning more about that too. That does sound like it's an area. That sounds particularly useful. Thank you. So subsequent waves, right? So here we are, right? We're to a point in Nevada, like a number of other states, where things right now are most contagious and worse than they've ever been before, and that conversations that were pretty robust and pretty moving along about how to expand the number of children that are in a building. We had the state authorizer here had originally a rule in place that 25% of kids can be in the building at any one time, and as long as there was the right amount of cleaning and safety measures in place, that they could rotate those kids. But we were really hoping that our schools, and we really engaged with our schools, and some of them were incredibly thoughtful about really prioritizing the kids who needed to be there most in person to take advantage of serving the kids most in need. And that number was going up to 40%, and schools were really making plans to transition to full time, to a way that kids could be in school full time, however that needed to happen. And suddenly we're back to where we are now. There's the old important lesson that the second half of a crisis is the most dangerous half, is something that's very much on our minds right now. We sort of felt comfortable, and we sort of felt like we can start making plans to really anticipate what was right around the corner, which is getting back to what we were all going to start calling whatever the new normal was going to be, that it was going to be passed. And then here we were again. So I think we need to probably anticipate that on whether it's on a rolling basis or as flashes pop up, whether it's 2 days or 2 weeks at a time in the future, that we're all going to be doing this for some time. So let's really make sure that the resiliency of our teaching and learning models and that everything that we're doing now is able to withstand this, so that as we commence the crucial business of addressing the learning loss that Naomi started the conversation with the bellwether slide about, that we're really going to make sure that the business of replacing that learning loss and sort of steepening our learning trajectories to really get where we need to be isn't going to be interrupted again. And if we can be in this, what are the ways that we can do this better that might actually benefit our teaching and learning long term, not just in pandemic or post-pandemic or second half of pandemic circumstances, but means we can really learn from here. I mean, we're in an environment where an awful lot of families now have one-to-one with devices, which is a really, really powerful tool for teaching and learning that 2 years ago would have been impossible to even think about. So how are we leveraging that to really make the most out of it in terms of our pedagogical practices and our learning?
I would love to have Lisa share her screen, but I don't see a way to do that. But I did Google Discord servers, and there, so I think if anyone were to do that, you can at least get a glimpse of what happens, and you join into different communities. It looks like, and I just think this is the time to repurpose that type of environment into schools. It's a great idea. I'll be sharing that with others. So thank you for sharing with us. And so really, we were, what we hoped was that, and this group in particular seems to already know this, like, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to try something that doesn't work. Because it's the only way we're going to move forward and through this. And that, if we hope that using our Safe Schools 7 remote learning plan template, you could assess whether what you're trying is working. So if you're looking at it from those different angles, you'd be able to say, yeah, am I measuring engagement? Am I looking at curriculum? Am I able to see my mission come through? That you're really able to determine on a programmatic level, are your decisions resulting in the best environment for students? And if they're not, what needs to happen to make changes? And so, our goal is that you try things, you use this tool to just kind of think about it, and it will allow you to be give you the confidence to make some pretty cool advances in education, because we don't have to look at this as we're never returning back to what we had. So all we're learning now is how to advance forward into a better place for students and teachers and all of us. Don, do you have anything you want to share?
Yeah. Well, certainly as we're winding down this session, if any of you have questions, practical questions, operational questions, things that you wish you had answers to, we've got a pretty great group here, and we all have our own circles of influence. So if you've got particular questions, Sarah, your point about you're saying that Discord is real big in gaming circles, something I wouldn't have known at all. But that this is going to be a tool that's going to be helpful to all of us. So if you have questions about any of that, please let me know and share. I think that we're all in this together ethic of all of this is just crucial now. We've got terrific groups of educators who are sharing ideas and practices and figuring out new ways to do things. Some maybe your equipment allows for teachers to iterate in pretty interesting ways and to create tools in their own classrooms that you can support that particular teacher, but also you can figure out ways to let that teacher support other teachers. And what are the lessons from all of this that we really want to make sure that we share moving forward, and that we can be there for each other and other schools, because the disparities that I'm seeing from one school to the next sometimes correlate to, obviously we've all thought in the charter school world for some time, particularly on the authorizing side, that our top performing schools are also highly effective organizations that can really operate nimbly and really, adjust and adapt and iterate as high performing organizations. Some of what we're seeing with success in teaching and learning correlates to that, and some of it just sort of doesn't. Right? If you've got something that worked really well, sometimes those charter schools have been the ones who are most reluctant to abandon what they have and to try something new. So I think that as we go and as we confront the circumstances that are continuing to upgrade or downgrade ahead of us, I think that sort of sharing and ways that we can, as if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a useful charter school association, or are figuring out other ways to do convenings. I think we're seeing some really good stuff being shared out there, and not a whole lot of universal platforms to get that done. Whether it's just pieces of software or good learning tools that other people can benefit from. There's some Facebook groups in your communities, I'm sure, that are great places to get new information and share. I think it's incumbent upon us. We've never really been a movement, right? We in the charter sector are really pretty silo driven and really busy people doing the work that we do. If there was ever a time to come together and share, this is that time. So forums like this, and some of the really strong ideas coming from peers like yourselves, now's the time. And however we can be helpful to that, please. That's what this is all about.
And that brings us to the end of our presentation, I believe. Thank you for spending this hour with us. We wish we could have seen you. But we really appreciate this time. You're welcome to reach out to us directly to continue the conversation. We hope you got something out of each other or our time together, and that you can use these resources that we created and others that are on the website. Again, if you go back to the beginning, there is a COVID-related resources that are all vetted resources that we think are helpful for people in your position to think through what it is that you need. And one of those resources is what we just talked about, what we talked about today, 7 essential pieces for remote learning plans. Would love to hear questions, but I think that's really hard. If there is anyone, we'll stick around. If there's anyone in chat who wants to add anything, great. Otherwise, enjoy your afternoons. Oh, cool. Thank you, Lisa. I will definitely join. I'm so interested. All right. Well, then I think we're going to end the session. Enjoyed being with you all. And Lisa, I'll see you in a minute on the Zoom. Thank you for doing that.